Good evening. My name is Jerry Mister, and I will be presenting the topic of multi-layered positioning, navigation, and timing. We will go over the following topics. The bulk of this will be about the near-peer catch-up from China, some lessons learned out of Russia, Ukraine war, and then the multi-layer PRT and the alternate solutions. So every year, the Defense Strategy Institute holds an annual Assured PNT Summit. The topics of multi-layer PNT comes from the third annual Assured PNT Summit back in May of 2023. There were two speakers that really stood out and kind of drove home the need for multi-layer PNT. The keynote speaker, General David Thompson, who at the time was the Vice Chief of Space Operations for Space Force. And then they had Major General Boris Kremensky. He is the Ukrainian Defense Attaché to the Ukraine Embassy in DC, who provided some really good insights and lessons learned from the current Ukraine war. That said, they both pointed out the fact that China and Russia have kind of closed the gap and are presenting real challenges in the battle space. So General Thompson started out reminding everyone that yes, GPS is the gold standard, but more importantly, it was the United States' gift to the world. And that the constellation conservatively is responsible for $1.4 trillion in global economic commerce based on first order of magnitude. And in terms of secondary and tertiary, it could be, 3 to 4 times that amount. But even with that good news, GPS, it's been up there a while. It has demonstrated some vulnerabilities to jamming and spoofing. But even more importantly, China has been able to close the gap that we had and deliver a multi-layered PNT or GNSS capability. And Russia is already starting to leverage multiple GNSS solutions on things like drones, such that if one system is denied in a battle space, they can still operate. So China's Beidou navigation satellite system, which started in the 90s, was able to close kind of the gap between their initial capability and what they offer now compared to GPS, while the United States is off in the war on terror for the last 2 decades. China has made advancements on many fronts, and one of them is this GNSS PNT space. As of December 23, based on the sources I collected, the Beidou system has 44 operational satellites. 7 of them are in geostationary orbit. 10 of them are in a highly inclined geosynchronous orbit. And then they have 27 in MEO. Additionally, right now China is using 10 of a planned 160 LEO satellites called Centispace, which is going to augment the GNSS capabilities, giving them, 3 orbital planes, so to speak, GEO, MEO, LEO in space. And all of these systems are integrated on the ground, through their master control station. And so this combination of LEO, MEO, GEO, and the ground integration represents a true multi-layered space-based PNT capability. And they beat us to the punch. And even if we feel that Bateau in many ways is inferior to GPS, the fact is they have a capability we do not, and we are now playing catch up. Major General Kremensky provided a lot of eye-opening feedback from the battle space across multiple areas. But the big takeaways from the related to this topic area is proliferated constellations are hard to defeat. So primarily we're talking about the fact that SpaceX, and mostly with COM at the time, but SpaceX basically was able to allow the Ukrainians to communicate. And then commercial space services, again SpaceX, are viable options in conflict. So I remember hearing, tales from both Gulf Wars about, they needed systems to just work, and people were just grabbing, kind of two-way radios, regardless of crypto, just to communicate. And so, we're finding ourselves now, as we'll see in the conclusion, in a hybrid space environment with military and commercial systems. And so, the Ukraine war is kind of the front line, so to speak, of proof of concept of how proliferated LEO and how commercial SATCOM can in fact, be used in war. And if anyone knows anything, there's always attempts to put up alternate PNT signals over traditional communication satellites. And so the other thing is, Russia was able to deny GPS, although admittedly they were only restricted to a limited space, and they could not deny the entire battle space. In fact, if they wanted to use GPS, then they had to allow GPS to be used by the Ukrainians. And again, because of proliferated LEO, that's really why they can't deny entire battle space, because there are satellites constantly in view, even if they are lower look angles. If they're denying things at zenith plus or minus 25, 30 degrees, there's still satellites, 15, 20, 30 degree look angles that can still get the signal to the battle space. And then the other thing they noticed was, as the drone warfare took off, some of these Syrian provided UAVs had multiple GPS. It had the Bateau system, it had the GLONASS, as well as our own GPS. So even if they denied GPS in an area, which would deny it to themselves, they still had two global, navigation systems to fly their drones and execute their mission. So why multi-layered PNT? Well, primarily it's to create a more resilient PNT environment, particularly in these what is called DDIL environments, delayed, denied, intermittent, and latent environments. So whether it's actual frequencies being denied, whether there's some kind of cyber attack that is, congesting the network, slowing things down, even if we have more water particles or objects around that would cause interference. There's a bunch of reasons to have this multi-layered PNT and not singularly rely on GPS. Yes, PNT focuses heavily on the space segment. Ideally, in a good multi-layer PNT, you do have GNSS or augmentation systems to GNS in LEO, MEO, and GEO. But it also includes potentially airborne capabilities and most definitely terrestrial capabilities, as we'll see in the next slide. And the other interesting thing is the whole solution doesn't necessarily need to be a self-contained US solution. The upside to that, of course, is we have control, but leveraging the European Space Agency, such as we saw with the Russian drones, using multiple GNS systems is possible. If we're operating in a regional area where, like Japan or India, we could have receivers that could leverage them as well. And yes, even in the most extreme case, you could actually leverage a near-peer adversary's GNSS, just as Russia was doing. But obviously, you're taking on some risk because you don't control that system. Kind of keeping in the theme, and the reason you can use, other nations' space-based systems is because, as General Thompson said, the United States multi-layered PNT is all of the above. And so we're going to leverage old techniques and new approaches. And some of those non-space, well, celestial is space-based, but in terms of, the observer is using celestial bodies. They are bringing back, things like star sensors and things of that nature to integrate on ground systems, tanks, etc. Inertial navigation systems are starting to become, alternates to GPS. They use accelerometers and gyroscopes to essentially perform, dead reckoning. Does require this system to be initialized with a known set of vectors before it can begin to operate. And then the one that's kind of new, neat, and getting a lot of attention is the magnetic navigation, which uses Earth's crustal magnetic field using magnetometers, etc. And there is a world magnetic map out that has become such high fidelity that it gives solid readings, highly reliable readings, and it can maintain that for over 5 years before, that map needs to be updated. So similarly to kind of timing drift, where you occasionally have to update it, the magnetic fields drift, and so you update that. But essentially, in both the inertial navigation and magnetic navigation, the idea is that, these systems are operating, online. You're using GPS as your primary source, but the initialization of these systems are coming from the GPS, such that if GPS fails, you have an immediate failover to a backup system. Those systems are very accurate for, good periods of time, although in the case of inertial, it will age faster, become less accurate than the magnetic navigation, which is as accurate as the map is. And so both of those are good alternatives to operate for days, weeks, even months in the case of the magnetic navigation, and have highly accurate positioning data. So in conclusion, Space Force has put out a lot of papers describing their vision. They want resilient, flexible space-based solutions, and that includes position navigation, timing, GNSS, and another thing that they call alt-nav or alternate navigation capabilities. And that vision includes a hybrid architecture, meaning it's comprised of both military and commercial space. So, reflecting back to what Colonel Thompson has said, in terms of all of the above, you can see how the vision lines up with that. And so essentially, while GPS 3 will, when it all gets full, and even when all the upgrades to M code and the ground systems are done, it'll still remain the backbone, but we will have this multi-layered approach. Ideally, multiple orbital planes, um, everything integrated in the ground, and we will have caught back up, so to speak, and hopefully surpass the Chinese. This is the list of references that I used to put both the paper and this presentation together. Thank you.